Well, welcome to the final in the Billy Ho Show. We've done 81 shows, which is just about a year and a half of episodes. I hope you enjoyed them. And to conclude, what we're going to do is talk to Richard Wakelin from Nelson, who's restored his old 1951 leyland Hippo. He got it way back in the day, probably 3 years ago. It just sat at the museum at Higgins Park in Wakefield. And he's quietly worked away, and now he's got it to the point where you can actually drive it. He's got doors on it, and he's painted it. So let's go and have a chat to Richard. Well, with me is Richard Wakeland, and we've spoken to you before, Richard, about when you first got this. It was just a big heap of rusty muck, and you decided, oh, okay, I think I might be able to do something with this. And you have. And look at it, it's absolutely spectacular. Yeah, so maybe you just tell us the final stages.
Well, after all the panel work, the front of it and parts of the back and the rear end of the mudguards and everything were in a very sad state. And if the motor hadn't started as it did, after Roger had fixed the starter motor for me, she'd have been
back in where it was.
Cash for the scrap merchant here for the park. But anyway, perseverance, and with the panel beating and some spot welding that I did on my own, and then another chap helped me on that, and well, that's about all I can say.
But you painted this lovely green.
Yes. This is what a similar colour to what the old original Hippo was down on Banks Peninsula.
Oh, okay.
And people have already said, oh, you've copied Solly's, but I specifically didn't want to have the same colour of Solly's TK Bedford in here.
Yep.
People did say, oh, you're going to paint it Wakeland red because the little jail bar and the bell nose in there. And I said, no, when you look around in the building here, there's already 8 red vehicles in here already.
Yes.
So something this size is being overkill. So no, we decided that the green, like the original was when I drove down around the peninsula in Canterbury.
So that must have been one hell of a drive. I mean, when I was talking to Lockie Griffin down there's nothing but hills, hills and more hills. And he's up in second gear and coming down in second gear. Sometimes first gear is that steep.
Yes.
Did you find that as well?
Very much so. The one bay down on the peninsula there, you may or may not heard of it, Little Akaloa they call it, over on the eastern side of the peninsula. And carting logs with a truck and trailer unit out of there. It was 4 miles from the bottom of the hill to the summit road, and it was a 1 in 4 grade all the way up that hill.
Wow.
It took an hour from the bottom to the top. The next hour was from the top of there to the bottom of the hill at Little River on the flat, and then another hour into the sawmill in Christchurch. So no, the hill certainly tried her out.
Yes.
But with gearing and everything, she never really missed a beat.
So you're obviously driven this thing. It goes. Is the gear pattern still the same? You put it in the first, and then when you change it, off you go again.
Yeah, a wee bit like that. I believe it or not, just on the last lap there, I actually flipped her into top gear, and away we went up the side. So yeah, all the gears do work. The reverse gear's a wee bit sick because the gearbox was mainly full of water and everything, and the gearbox is in quite a bad way. But as she's never going from here to Auckland, just round the park here, and as long as she'll back into the shed there in reverse, that's all we're worried about.
So there you go, Alex. Richard's done wonders with that old truck you had sitting in the corner of your shed down there when we clapped eyes on it on one of our old truck tours.
Yes.
But anyway, congratulations, Richard. Absolutely first class.
Thanks for being able to take part in your shows.
Excellent. Good on you.
Thank you. Oh, come on.
When we were at Twizel, both Max Lye and Mike Higgins had heard of the big Marion face shovel that worked at Benmore, and they both thought it ended up at Stockton, the big open cast coal mine near Granity just north of Westport. A man we spoke to, Keith Davies, also remembers the big Marion going up to Stockton after doing some work associated with the Westport breakwater. Mickey Ryan from Out West Tours in Westport knows where the remains of the Marion is, and his mate Gary Cummins knows a bit about the old girl. So let's have a chat about the old Marion with Gary. Over the last 40 shows we've done, we've come across a big mechanical shovel called a Marion, and Gary, this is what's left of the one that used to be at Stockton.
Yeah, this is a bucket from the Marion Shovel, which is a 5-yard bucket. It originally came with a 7-yard bucket on it, but they took the 7-yard bucket off, put a 5-yard bucket on it, and put a longer boom on it to reach the higher face.
Oh, okay.
And then they put an extra counterweight in the back of the Marion shovel to counterweight it. And it was actually 1947 Marion, and it was a 191M Marion shovel. That was the serial number on it.
And they put the welding there,
yes,
Gary, that's just repairs along the way?
Yeah, just hard servicing. They used to put new strips on the bottom because the rock's really abrasive. Yes. Sandstone wear out pretty quick. Oh, the back of the bucket opens, swings out. Yeah, when I was a child at school, like there wasn't health and safety at the mines then, and all the kids used to go work with their fathers on a Saturday and ride in these machines and ride in the trucks and stuff, which is a definite no-no.
Gave you inspiration for coming, inspired you to get into all this in later years?
Yeah.
As a kid?
No, well, I really never wanted to be a machine operator. I wanted to be a carpenter, but my brother was apprentice and mechanic, and I didn't like school. I used to sit and watch him do his assignments, and I thought, this is not for me. So I went to the mine and became an operator, which I really enjoyed. I always found the challenge.
Yeah, wow.
And those days we didn't have to do sign-offs. You basically taught yourself. I used to drive a truck for a start at 17. I drove a truck for 12 months before I could even get my licence. You had to be 18 to get a licence.
Seemed to be the norm over here on the coast.
Yeah, and then I basically used to eat my lunch in the truck, and when the guys went for smokers, and then I'd get on their loaders and dozers and learn myself, basically.
Good on you.
Yeah, the teeth on the bottom of these are called the dipper sticks, and the teeth on the bottom of there run on a little cog, which you'll see on the other part of the boom when we get over there, and that's what run the dipper sticks in and out when they were just worked it that way.
It's a big thing.
Yeah, well, you can see the pulley on the top there where the rope went up to the jib.
So this bit here affixes to that?
It runs through here. See, there's the little wheel, those cogs on the run off up and down there.
Any idea what it weighed?
The Marion itself, it was, I believe it was 190 tonne. Like, that's about the same weight as a 1900 Hitachi, but they look far bigger than that.
This is for the wires?
Yeah, this is for the cables, run down the boom into the main winch drum. Had a massive big winch in there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at this, folks. Enormous. Gary, would you have seen this working?
Yes, I've seen it working. It came back from the Cape Fowl, and they used it on the breakwater out there at the quarry at out the cement works.
Oh,
there
right.
to bring rock in for the breakwater, and it came back to Stockton. It never really dug rock again. It was used once that I can remember, probably around 69, 70. I'm not exactly sure. They bought another big shovel here, and they unloaded the boom, and main body, they lifted it with this because the cranes of those days weren't heavy enough to lift it.
Okay.
And But that shovel was bought here for a coal-fired power station when they're going to build one in New Plymouth, which never eventuated. So it was put in a shed there, and it was there for quite a few years, and then it was taken away. And yeah, my father was actually the last person to drive the shovel.
Okay.
And yeah, it was parked up, I'm not 100% sure, early 70s. That would be the last time it was used.
Is there any sort of, you know, are they going to try and restore this?
Only these two pieces here. The rest of it has been gone for scrap.
Oh, right.
These two pieces are going to be set up at the Grundy Museum. It's going to be set up the same way as it was attached to the boom,
Yep.
to the main body of the digger.
Gary, brakes?
Yeah, this is the main brake for the dipper sticks when they run in and out.
Oh yes, yeah.
When he went out, if he wanted to stop at a certain length, they just apply the brake.
Would you put your foot on a lever? Or
No, they had from what I can remember, it had a big panel on the side of the cab, and they had all switches on there,
yeah.
and they worked by that.
Oh.
It actually had one pedal slewed it one way, the other pedal slewed it the other way, and just had two levers back and forward, one for the boom up and down, and one for the dipper sticks in and out.
And
but
to get the shovel, does it shovel this way?
Yeah, it shoveled out the way as a face shovel, yeah, not as a backhoe.
And then lift it around and put it over whatever, and then
yeah,
the bottom
put it over the truck, and the back door just opened out. Yeah,
and then
pretty simple.
Like we watched the guy with his drag line.
Yeah.
Beautiful to watch. Nice slew, chuck, drag.
Yeah, I missed that program. Yeah, it was only on a few weeks ago. Yeah. I missed that one because when I was at the Ministry of Works, they had an RB30 drag line exactly the same as that, but I never got to go at that.
No. I was just saying, this is sort of starting to fall to bits a bit.
Yeah, she's pretty rusty.
Anyway, it's going to be a museum piece, so if you're down Granity Way, just continue along a ways and you'll come across this. Is that where they're going to have it?
Yeah, it's going to be set up at the Grandy Museum.
Yeah, in due course.
It's supposed to be, well, it was supposed to be this month, October, I believe. They got a grant from Lotto to set it up down there. Originally the whole machine was going to be set there, but it was in pretty poor condition. All the cab was rusted off it, and that. Yeah. So then Solid Energy's run out of money, of course. So yes, the rest of it got scrapped.
This is part of the Marion too, Gary.
Yeah, this is the anchor part for the boom, which sits on the top of in behind the cab, and the ropes came off the top of the jib in through the pulleys here, as you can see, and down through onto the main winch drum, which drove it.
Those ropes are pretty important.
Yes, very important.
And you might remember, folks, we did a little piece on a big crane at Taramanui, and you can see rope after rope after rope, all lined up, and it's the same with this.
Yeah, you'll see them on the photos I've got. Yeah. Plus that piece over there's a brake there on there for running the jib out. You see that coming around the other side there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Gary. A great insight into a very big machine of his day. To conclude this section, I've got some old footage of a big Marion face shovel working. And as you can see, this is what the Marion would have looked like working back in the day. You can see the dipper arm working, the boom lifting, and of course the big shovel out the front digging up the material and loading it onto the trucks. At 190 tonnes, this was a very big machine. Again, thanks Gary, a great insight into the old Marion I've heard so much about.
The car is owned by Terry Chappell, who has a lot of cars, has collected a lot of cars, motorbikes and tractors over the years. Long time member of the Vintage Car Club of New Zealand, Canterbury branch. This is one of his current vehicles. It's a 1954 standard Vanguard. It's a Series 2 model, and this particular model in Britain, it came out mass produced. The first mass produced car to come from, leave Britain, and that was fitted with a diesel engine. Now the engine that was fitted to this was a 4-cylinder Ferguson tractor engine. It was one of the first of the diesel engines in the tractors before they went to the 3-cylinder, and in 1954 standard fitted that engine to the car. Now they weren't a popular car. They were slow, they were cumbersome, they were noisy, and they didn't sell particularly well. So what they did was they enhanced the vehicle with an overdrive, and I think they sold them in bulk to different firms who used them for travelling salesmen who did long mileage, had their wares to cart around, and they were restricted to that market really because they weren't popular with the public, and they managed to offload them to companies that, as I say, used them for travelling salesmen with the overdrive and did huge long miles in them. And of course they would go for a long way because they were a long life because they were diesel. And this is one of the ones that somehow has ended up in New Zealand, and it's in its current configuration as a diesel. It's been totally restored, inside and out, under and over. It's had a lot of money spent on it, and it's been brought back to completely as it was, would have been in the factory back in 1954 when they were produced. With a diesel, we've got to turn the key on, and we've got to heat the diesel. We've got to heat the diesel with the glow plugs before we start the engine. Now it's been going. Normally it'd take 40 seconds to heat the glow plug, so we'll push it in now, and that light shining shows that the glow plugs are heating the diesel. As I say, we're not going to do it for the 40 seconds. It's been going, and what we'll do now has been sufficient, and we'll start her up.
Milburn Lime, every time. Milburn Lime, available all over the Southland district and beyond. Top grade lime that's been available year after year. Call them on 03 417 8228. The next time you need lime, think Milburn Lime, every time. What I've got here is a copy of Talking Trucks. This is a book I wrote a couple of years ago, and it's the history of New Zealand trucking. And it's all from the programs that I did between 2013 and 2016. I'm going to let this go for $25. So it's a special. So if you'd like your copy, there's my phone number, 027 277 0717. Just send me a text or email me, billhohipper@extra.co.nz to get your copy. $25 and the history of New Zealand trucks. With me is a very good friend of mine, Peter Walton. And Peter is an air flyer, a pilot, and really enjoys what he does. And in his hangar here, he's got a couple of aeroplanes, and the first one is a Fokker Triplane. Is that what it's called?
Yep, Fokker DR1 Triplane.
Triplane. And I seen, when I was young, I read all the war comics. That's what you did back in the day. And one of the comics, or even a couple of comics, were about the pilots who flew those triplanes and having a bit of fun with machine guns, etc., etc. And so that's about my entire knowledge of triplanes. But just starting from the beginning, you were telling me before that the British started with the triplanes.
Yes, the Brits made a Sopwith. Sopwith built a three-wing aeroplane and often nicknamed the Tripe, the triplane. So it was a Sopwith triplane, and it was quite successful in its day. But back then, of course, the ebb and flow of who was ahead and who was behind swapped backwards and forwards, quite often. And for a short period, the Sopwith triplane was doing quite well, and so Fokker got given the instructions to quickly build a triplane for the Germans, and hence the DR1 triplane, Fokker triplane.
So tell me about Sopwith. It was Sopwith?
Yeah, Sopwith.
Sopwith. That's a British company who built aeroplanes.
Yep, well, they made all sorts of things.
But it was all, what I'm recalling is the Sopwith Camel.
Yeah, they made the Camel.
And I'm just wondering, do you know why they called it a Camel?
Yeah, well, it had a cover over the machine guns, because what would happen is the oil and grease that they had in the old days, not quite as good as today, probably whale oil or something, and in the freezing cold, the guns would jam, and so they put this cover over the top of the guns to keep some of the heat from the engine around the guns to keep the grease from freezing, and that hump was why they called it the camel.
Oh, okay. Well, you've answered a question.
There you
I've
go.
always wondered why they called it a camel. Now I know.
There you go.
So, first of all, what made you sort of build a triplane in the first place?
Well, I guess it came back from when I was a kid, making, airfix models and stuff like that. You always had a plastic model you were playing around with. They were pretty cheap when we were kids. And there was something about the triplane, the Red Baron. And I always had a hankering to build something like that. Something between, Magnificent Men and the Flying Machines and the First World War. And then this got in the way. I was at the Tauranga Air Show many, many years ago, about 2005 or so, with my brother, and the company was selling these kits, and I sort of got pushed into one of these. And
So you built this as well?
yep, well, a friend of mine,
it's got the fuel.
Mike Crean, did more than me on it. But, so this has been flying 10 years. But in the back, there was always this hankering to have a triplane. And then I was travelling through the States and came across a company in Missouri, and they built a number of First World War aeroplane kits. So I thought, well, I'll buy one of those kits and bring it down here and get into it. And that's what happened.
So it's like your model.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a bit more difficult than the model. The model, all the pieces were already the right shape. You just had to glue them together. This was a collection of straight tubing that all had to be bent and cut and all of that stuff.
And so you've got the model, now you need to put an engine in it. And I just seem to remember that the engines in those things were the
Rotaries.
Yeah, so the pistons went around.
Yep.
And the propeller was attached to whatever holding those on,
Yeah.
and so that whole engine is going around a crankshaft.
Yeah, so the propeller was bolted onto the block, the cylinder block, and the crankshaft was bolted onto the aeroplane, which is the opposite to what
you would expect.
what happens today.
Yeah, right.
And they were called rotary engines, and of course now people, when you talk about a rotary engine, they think of a Mazda,
Yeah.
with a Wankel engine, but those were the initial rotary engines.
Right, and what have you got in it now?
Well, in it I have, in the Fokker, I've got a Lycoming 0290, which is 290 cubic inches. It's a 4-cylinder horizontally opposed engine. Yeah, so like a VW engine, except much bigger, 290
And for the
cubic
truckers
inches.
out here, it's a bit like a TS3, comma.
Yeah, well, a TS3 has 3 cylinders and 6 pistons. This has got 4 cylinders and 4 pistons.
Oh, right.
So yeah, so that's what we've got. I was sort of going for a bit of safety and stuff, and those engines are relatively cheap. So we thought we'd put that in and see how we go. And maybe at some stage in the future we might put a radial in it, which looks like a rotary, but that's one where the crankshaft is bolted to the propeller and the block's bolted to the aeroplane.
Back in that time, back in World War I mean, everybody's inventing stuff furiously. Different ideas coming out every month, what's that? Oh, I don't know, let's go and see, But even with the cars, engines of all sorts, they're all being invented.
Yeah, well, electric cars, I think the first electric car might have even been in the 1898 or something.
Yeah, it's pretty close to 1900.
And then steam cars and petrol cars, diesel cars.
In about 1914, the general opinion was that steam would be the mainstream power for most vehicles, but then Henry Ford invented his Tin Lizzie, and that was set in concrete after that. Yeah, amazing. So when you get your aeroplane ready, do you have to, I see you were dusting it.
That's because I've got a woodworking shop out the side there.
Oh.
and it gets pretty dusty, so I thought I'd better dust it off, like having a makeup artist.
So if you
for the
didn't do that,
aeroplane.
there'd be a big stream of dust going past it down the runway.
Yes, something like that, yeah. Yeah.
So how far do you have to go to get the lift? I mean, it's got 3 wings. That means must have plenty of lift. So how far down that runway? 100 metres, 80 metres? before you
Yeah,
actually...
probably. I've not actually measured off. It gets off pretty quick, as you saw.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great fun to fly. It was a bit of a handful at the start, but we're quite fortunate. There's a whole host of pilots have retired to Whitianga, and Keith Skilling, who's a pretty famous aviator, New Zealand aviator that's done display flying and flown lots of First World War aeroplanes. He took me under his wing and gave me a couple of pointers.
Wow.
And he's been a godsend. So I'm enjoying it now.
You can draw on plenty of experience, is pretty much what you're...
It's a real haven of pilot experience at Whitianga.
Sure. So none of them get a job in the real world, but they've all got plenty of experience to share here.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of ex-airline pilots and top-dressing pilots and all sorts of stuff.
So when you have this thing out, do you get many people go and say, I remember that? You know, guys in their 90s?
well, generally, today was, it's a weekday, but if I pull it out on the weekend, the traffic sort of starts stopping along the fence line.
Oh, wow.
And you end up with a bit of a crowd.
You might remember the little clip we did about radios and listening to Life with Dexter and programs like that, the Goon Show. Well, behind me here is an array of the radios that were around in the 40s, 50s and 60s, and most people had a radio, something similar to what we've got here, sitting on the mantelpiece or on a sideboard or somewhere like that to entertain themselves by listening to the radio. And what I'm leaning on here is a radiogram. So if I lift this up, there's a record player, and they played mainly 78s, but yeah, this says it's one speed, 78 and 45. So these play 45s and 78s, and there's a little stacker thing here that you lift it up, you put the records on, you put this back on, and so you could have 3 or 4 or 5 records stacked on top of each other, so when one stopped playing it would come out, drop the next one, and on it would go again, and you'd get 4 or 5 records playing out of one shot, if you like. So the old radiogram record player, really flash. So there you go, the Billy Ho Show. Now I'd like to thank Roger Mann and John Welsh for their input in supporting the show, and good on them. So if you're going to Geraldine, Rogers Museum is about 3k north on the left, and if you're coming the other way, cross the bridge and it's about 2k down the road on the right hand side. There's their contact details. If you'd like to go and visit Rogers Museum, give them a call, and I'm sure they'll just love to make the arrangements, and so you can see what they've got there. Absolutely amazing. So that's it. We'll see you next week with a brand new series we're calling Cranes and All.